Go ahead and get started. If you want to open your Bibles up with me to Genesis chapter 18.
I feel like this one was really hard, but I think that also could just be me.
Did anybody else struggle with it? What'd you think?
Trust me, I didn't struggle at all.
Well, this is the story of the three men who come to visit Abraham. There are indications in the beginning of the chapter that Abraham understands that one of them is God. He refers to him as Adonai, which means my Lord, which is a general term, and yet he falls on his feet before him and says, let your servant, please come to the house of your servant. And there's just a number of indications that Abraham has some understanding of the fact that one of those three people is God. Because there's never really a point in the story where all of a sudden Abraham is like, oh, it's God. He seems to know from the beginning. If not, the story doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So he seems to have a pretty good idea along the way who exactly it is that he's dealing with. How he knows that, we're not really told. I coach cross country, and this is the first time that the word run, roots, occurs in the Old Testament. It's in Genesis 18. When Abraham runs out to God. Just a little cross-country trivia there for you. So the story really is them eating and spending time with Sarah, and they tell Sarah she's going to have a child, and Abraham laughs, then Sarah laughs. Sarah usually gets the brunt of the blame, but Abraham laughed before Sarah laughed, because Abraham actually laughed back in chapter 15. So Sarah is the one who laughs here in chapter 18. Everybody says, oh, he's named Isaac because Sarah laughed. But really, we're never told why he's called Isaac directly in terms of who laughed. So he can't really blame just Sarah. But they both laugh. Sarah's a little scared, so she lies that she laughed. But she laughed, and God is gracious and says, yeah, you laughed. But he kind of leaves it at that. But then in verse 16, we read that the men get up and they look down upon Sodom. They gaze upon the face of Sodom. Some people have suggested that maybe this means that Mamre is actually in a higher elevation than Sodom, so that they're actually looking down the valley. But I prefer to think of this more like we talk in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I'm going down to Charlottesville, or I'm going up to Blacksburg, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. People keep telling me it's because it's a higher elevation, but that's baloney. I mean, it is higher elevation, but that's not what people are thinking. Just how people think. Because if they're going to Wytheville, they also say they're going up to Wytheville, and that's not higher elevation. So you can't buy that. But I think it's the same idea. They're looking out across the valley, and Abraham goes along with them. He's going to be sending them off. And there's this conversation that God has in verse 17. The Lord says, should I be hiding from Abraham what I am doing? It's possible that this conversation could be taken as a perfect, as it were, that the Lord had said, should I be hiding from Abraham what I'm doing? Not that he is walking with Abraham and then stops and kind of turns his back on Abraham and awkwardly turns to the other two, has this conversation with Abraham standing right there. It almost seems as though there's this conversation has taken place perhaps prior to any appearance of Abraham in the story. So it could be kind of a historical past that the Lord had said, but it's also possible that the Lord said, and he kind of turns and says, hey, should I tell him? Should I tell him what I'm doing? It's interesting, though, because the fact that you have God deliberating here.
Yeah.
Almost as though he's debating, should I tell him? I don't know, should I not? But really the emphasis seems to be more upon verse 19, because it's this is why I should tell him. This is why he should be privy to what I'm doing and know about the secret counsels of God. Because to some degree, the conversation between God and these angels has the appearance of the what we often call the divine counsel, where there are several times in the Old Testament where God seems to be having this conversation with a group of people, but not people, probably other spiritual beings, perhaps. Genesis 1 is probably the most well-known example. Let us make man in our image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. But he says, let us make man in our image. And could it be an allusion to the Trinity? Sure. But we see it again in Job. We see it in several places where God is just having this conversation with other people. And from time to time, you see a prophet getting called up, in a sense, so that he's standing in the divine council and he's hearing the conversation that's taking place, even though he's not really a member of that council. So the picture here is almost of Abraham, again, he's being privy to what's going on. So it's not just that he's this great guy and he gave him a great meal, but he's been elevated to this very high position where he gets to know the secret things of God. And God is about to reveal to him what's going to happen, which is why God says in verse 19, I've known him. He will command his sons and his daughters after him, and they will keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, so that the Lord will bring upon Abraham that which he spoke over him. So there's kind of this reminder of the blessing that's going to take place because of the covenant promises that have been made upon Abraham. And there in verse 20, we see the problem, that there's this issue that's going on. So there's a precipitating conflict that has created the current situation, and God is deliberating, as it were, potentially with the two angels. It's also possibly just talking to himself, almost deliberating to the air. But the point of this aside or this soliloquy is to remind the reader, and in a sense to remind the angels perhaps, but to remind everybody who's hearing about the story, there's a reason why Abraham gets to know what's about to happen. And that is because he's in this high exalted position. He is the father of the nation of Israel. Even though his name is not the name that's on it, it's Jacob's name, but he is Father Abraham. And that becomes significant even for us in the book of Galatians as Christians, that we too are sons of Abraham. So he's going to become a great nation. Verse 18, become a great nation. All the nations of the earth will be blessed in him. Or some translations, all the nations of the earth will bless themselves in him. The NIV actually has a footnote, all the nations will use his name as a blessing, which is not really likely, but it's probably a better translation, if you wanted to be technical about the reflexive part, to say they will bless themselves in him. In other words, the nations will try by association with Abraham to cause blessings to themselves, because they're going to figure out, hey, if we're nice to Israel, good things happen to us, because God blesses those who bless them. So let's have a relationship with them. Hiram, king of Tyre, is one of the names that comes to mind. He recognized, hey, if I am nice to David and Solomon, good things happen. If I'm mean to David and Solomon, bad things happen. So it's not really rocket science. But again, this all goes back to Genesis 12 and that covenant blessing with Abraham. And God is saying, look, the covenant blessing is what establishes that relationship between Abraham and God, but also allows Abraham then to be that instrument of God's plan, but then also to be the one through whom the plan of God is going to be accomplished, which is why he says, well, if all of that's going to happen, then surely I should share what is really going to happen down in the valley, which is where we pick up the story then in verse 20. And I believe that's where we started with our translation. Is that correct?
In 22.
Oh, never mind then. Okay, so in verse 20, he says, the outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very weighty. The word for weighty is kavod, which is often translated as glory. So we wouldn't say their sin is very glorious. It's their sin is very weighty, it's very heavy, it's very serious. And the outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great. And it's interesting because we don't we don't really know who's crying out. Some people have suggested that, Brown Driver Briggs in their lexicon suggests that it's an outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah rather than an outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah. Because all it says is, the Lord said, outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah. So is it of, is it for, is it from, is it against? The form is only used here for outcry against once in the Old Testament. So that would be unusual to have it here. Only in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 11, do we see an outcry against something. Usually it's an outcry from something, although both the ESV and the NIV do translate it as an outcry against, whereas the King James Version cheats and just says the cry of Sodom. Waltke actually points out that there is a relationship between the za'akat, the outcry, and the tzedakah, the righteousness of Abraham. So there's potentially a reason why this particular word is used instead of just, I've heard about the wickedness of Israel or of Sodom and Gomorrah, but there's actually an outcry. So it's always hard to tell when words rhyme like that, if that was deliberate or if it's accidental. We obviously can't ask the author, but there might be good reason to say that that's the case. And the outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah, again, there's no real explanation as to who it is that's actually crying out. We don't know who's crying out, but something is crying out. Given the situation, if we say it's the righteous who are crying out, then it's Lot who's crying out, which, if you take 2 Peter into account, is possible, but we don't have anything that specifically says that. I would be more inclined to think, especially because it's opposed to the tzedakah of Abraham, that this is just a general, the sound of their wickedness, the cry of their wickedness has reached God. And the outcry is indeed great, especially because it's parallel to their sin is very weighty, that he's not really trying to specify who in Sodom and Gomorrah is doing the outcry, but just the fact that there is an outcry and it's great, which is what started this whole thing. Because then in verse 21, he says, I will go down, and this is a cohortative, I will go down, Iradana, I will go down, and I have it translated as I will go down, if you will excuse me, and see if they have done completely as the outcry coming to me, and if not, I will know. What's interesting, though, is that God doesn't go down. God leaves, the two angels go down. God never goes down. So that's an interesting part of the story of I'm going to go down, but he doesn't go down. Angels do. So what does he mean by I will go down and see? And it might just simply be that's just the construction. I'm going to go check it out, rather than a literal I'm going to walk down there and see. It might just be we're going to go investigate and see what's going on. And then it ends with a clause, a conditional, and there's a negative. If not, then I will know. And the Makef on the im lo tells us that it's if not rather than if I will not know. The lo does not go with the I will know, it goes with the if not. Which then brings us to verse 22. If somebody wants to read verse 22 there. Anybody?
I mean, I can.
Okay.
I'm just hoping
Nope, go ahead.
else would volunteer.
Yep, go ahead.
Bayit nu Misham Ha'anashim Bailku. Bailku. Sodoma Ba'avraham. Odino Omed Lifnei Adonai.
Yep. And it would be Odenu.
Odenu.
Because the accent mark is on the dalet, so Odenu. Yeah, very good. Yeah, can you translate it for us?
All but one word.
Okay.
I could not figure it out.
Yes.
Well, it's saying that they turned aside from there, and then the Ha'anashim, for whatever reason, I could not figure out, and then I had to move on, and then he went back, still couldn't figure it out. And then Bailku, going walking to Sodom. Also spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out what Sodom was. And I looked at the net and it was like, it's Sodom. And Abraham was still standing before the Lord.
Yeah, the Ha'anoshim, Anoshim is the plural of Ish.
I thought that, but it didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, for whatever reason, we do have a singular form, Anosh, but when Ish goes plural, it uses Anoshim. So this is the Anoshim, the men.
Didn't make sense to me.
Yep. So the men, they went down from there, the men. And one clue that we have is the fact that you have the accent over Ha'anoshim, which sets Ha'anoshim apart with Vayifnu Misham. So those three words have to go together. So then you can kind of guess at it as to what it might be. But yeah, that's a tricky one, because I have a feeling that if you looked Anoshim up in a lexicon, you wouldn't find it.
There was nothing. I was trying to figure out.
Because it's a irregular plural.
And I was like, the only thing that remotely looked like it was Ish, but I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And I looked, I was like, I was pretty sure that was a the, and I was like, maybe you made assumptions. It is not a the. And then Nish or Anash, there's like nothing. It was great.
Yep, that's it.
So I couldn't for the life of me figure it out.
So the men turned and went down from there. The interesting part of this is Va'avraham Odenu Omed Lifnei Adonai. If you see in your apparatus there's a little A before Va'avraham, and there's a little A after Adonai. And if you look down on the footnote, it says Tik Sof Lekt Oreg Vadonai Avraham. You see that down the bottom, if you have footnotes down there. The Tik Sof is a Latin term. It's Tikkun Soferim. And this is one of 18 places in the Old Testament where we know for a fact that the Masoretes changed it because they were uncomfortable with the theology. Because the original, and that's what the little footnote, Vadonai Avraham, the footnote had it the other way, the original had it the other way around. Adonai was standing Lifnei Avraham. That the Lord was standing before Abraham, instead of Abraham was standing before Adonai. Why do you think they'd be uncomfortable with that? Why would they be uncomfortable with God standing before?
It makes it sound like Abraham has the authority.
Yeah. So you can see why they would be uncomfortable with that. Why, if they're uncomfortable with that, then why does the original say that?
No.
I mean, can it be God in his graciousness is answering Abraham's questions, and so he is standing before Abraham? It's like God was the one, the angel of the Lord came to see him and Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the one who approached Abraham, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like he just hadn't left yet?
I mean, yeah, was he?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what. I mean, the prepositional phrase does make it sound like Abraham's in authority there,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't change it too much, does it?
Probably not too much of a change, but is there any reason why Moses would feel it not even necessary, but I mean, he certainly has a theology that says God is in control. So it's odd that he would even insinuate in the least, especially when we've seen how careful he has been in Genesis 1 and in other places to make it very clear whenever there's any ambiguity, he's gone out of his way to make it clear that God is God and no one else. So it seems odd that he would accidentally have a passage that makes it seem as though Abraham has the authority and not God. Which makes you think, it's probably deliberate. So
this
what?
would have been like an error from copying.
I wouldn't think so.
Because it is like truly original.
Mm-hmm. Well, our oldest manuscripts have it, and the Masoretes actually admitted that they changed it. Although a number of scholars have still tried to make the argument that it should be changed, and that the original is the way the Masoretes had it, even though the Masoretes said we changed it. How that works, I don't really know. But what benefit or what advantage or what would have prompted Moses to write a passage that would imply that Abraham has the authority?
The only thing I can guess is because the lead up to this section of scripture, the Lord has this conversation with himself about how he's chosen Abraham, and should I tell him, should I not?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's discussing, and so then I guess if the Lord is actually standing before Abraham, then he's decided, okay, this is the guy I'm going to have my covenant with, and I guess I should answer his questions.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can guess.
Mm-hmm. I think that's certainly part of it, that he knows who, or he has chosen Abraham, said Abraham's going to be my agent on earth. The line is going to go through Abraham. All nations on earth are going to bless themselves in Abraham. Abraham is very significant, so significant that I'm going to make him privy to my counsel and let him know what's going on. So in a sense, Abraham does have a lot of authority. And this would certainly be emphasizing that Abraham has a special relationship now with God. Why else? That's certainly half of it. That's certainly a big chunk of it. We've had that whole lead up that this isn't terribly unexpected that God would then make Abraham put him in the position of authority, as it were, because of what he's just said about him, how he's going to be the agent of blessing for the entire world. So of course I'm going to tell him what I'm doing. And of course he has authority. But what other benefit to the story does it gain us by having God seemingly put himself in a subservient position to Abraham?
Well, Abraham can have this conversation about how many righteous people in the city will God spared. So, I mean, the men are going to go towards Sodom and go figure out, go to see the outcry or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But if the Lord is still standing with Abraham, then it's like the Lord is condescending to have a conversation with Abraham, and is almost in his mercy, he knows that Abraham's going to ask him about the righteous in the city.
Yeah.
And so in his mercy, he is giving the city an incredible graciousness
Mm-hmm.
and condescending to hear Abraham's, I don't know if you call this a prayer or conversation, something like that.
Yeah.
But the Lord has to still be here for them to have this conversation, and he has to still stand before Abraham, and almost gives Abraham the courage, I would think, to ask so many things right in a row.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, I think so. I think he's prompting Abraham to act. So in a sense, he's making it as clear as possible. Abraham, you know what I'm going to do. Because at some point, I mean, he never tells him, I'm going to go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And yet the implication of, should I tell him what I'm going to do? At some point in the story, he told him. Or Abraham figured it out. So you almost have to infer between, verses 19 and 20 and verses 21 and 22. You have to infer that somewhere in there, something clicked. Whether it's we're standing on a hillside and we're looking down on Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham knows he's talking to God, and then these two angels start walking towards the city, and Abraham's like, uh-oh. It might have been that, or it might have been when God says, should I tell him? And the rhetorical answer, which is never given, is, well, yes, I should. That then he did. And so the men leave, and the Lord is still standing there. And so the Lord is just kind of looking at him like, all right, now you know what you can do about it. Almost expecting Abraham of, well, you're the one I'm going to bless. All the world is going to be blessed through you. So, let's see it. Let's see you bless the world. Do it. Bruce Waltke says that God stands before Abraham because the Lord is forcing Abraham to play the role of a righteous judge, which is the very thing that Abraham is about to tell God. How could you be a righteous judge if you do this? Which, again, it's not as though God didn't see this coming.
Right.
And so, this whole thing has been prompted by God, but by putting himself in that subservient position and putting Abraham as the authority, it's kind of, he's letting Abraham get to the conclusion that he wants him to get to without just coming out and saying it. I'm the righteous judge, beg me. He's just kind of standing there like, I can see the wheels turning. There, I can hear the hamster wheel going, and yeah, up, here it comes. Okay, yeah, okay, here it comes. He's figuring it out, and yeah, and then we have this conversation, which is a fascinating conversation because the conversation is a complete failure.
Well, but is it a failure? Because it allows Abraham to see exactly how merciful this God is.
Yeah.
That he gets all the way down to 10. And he asks how many questions? He just keeps standing there.
Yep.
Being interrogated by Abraham. I don't know, if I was Abraham, I'd be like very encouraged. So, it didn't really help Sodom. I don't think anything would at that point, but it gave Abraham, it must have given him an incredible faith.
Yeah. Yeah, so we would consider it a failure on the one hand of, well, it didn't save the cities.
Yeah.
But I don't know that was really Abraham's goal. His goal was to see the righteous saved. And in that sense, the prayer was answered, even though Abraham didn't ask for that particular part, because he stops at 10. Somebody want to read verse 23?
Vayanash.
It's actually Vayegash. That's a Gimel.
Oh,
Gimel and Noon are horrible fonts in
that really
in
is. I can't
this.
see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's annoying.
Vayagash. Abraham, let's see. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
by is that supposed to be that dot over the olive?
Mm-hmm.
Is that an O?
Mm-hmm.
It's just on the other side.
It's usually on that side.
Oh, it is.
It just because it's a aleph is just a very wide letter,
Okay,
so you don't really notice it. But
so that is
yeah.
just by Yamar.
Yep.
Ha'af. Tis. Hey. Sadiq. Im. Rasha.
Mm-hmm. Can you parse Vayagash?
Vayagash. Almite told us from Nagash.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This is one of those weird one nun verbs where the nun assimilates in. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then what is the hey at the beginning of ha'af?
I was going to ask you that. Is that a weird? Is that almost like an interrogative particle?
Mm-hmm.
But it
Yep.
just kind of got a weird vowel on it because of the.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just because of the combination of it's a one syllable word,
Okay.
which really screws it up. So usually, yeah, you would expect the compound schwa with the patak, but yeah, because it's a one syllable word and you got a short vowel and it's just a lot of screwy things. So, and off is also a screwy word because off is one of those words that could mean nose, it can mean anger, or it can also mean yay or surely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so this is a question, surely, or will you even? Number of different ways you can translate that. It could be also, yeah. It's probably more emphatic than will you. It could be will you also do?
Will you also? Will you?
Yeah. Yeah. Will you also kill righteous with the wicked? Yeah.
And what did that first word mean?
Ha'af. That one.
No, the
Said
Vayagash, Vayagash.
that is he drew near. So nagash means to approach or to draw near. So he drew near. Abraham drew near to God, even though there's no indication of where he's drawing near to. And what about tispeh?
Is that the sweep away
Yep.
from Safa? 6 and 7.
Yes, that is safa from sweep away. Yep.
Okay.
And what stem did you say that was?
Cal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yep.
S.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah, the King James Version translates it as destroy.
Some had it as slaughter, but then the only thing I can find like snatch away or sweep or.
Yeah, it's usually more sweeping or, yeah. So destroying or slaughtering, that's the idea, but yeah.
Sorry, question from the previous sentence. If we know that the Masoretes switched it, why didn't we switch it back? Why is it in all of our translations
Yeah,
wrong way?
this is one of the things that annoys me about the way that we do the Old Testament text. And we're we're basically using a received text, which means that they wrote a text, we used it. And then all the differences in places that we think that it's a mistake, we just put it in a footnote.
Right, but they actually told us this
Yes.
time that they switched it, so it seems like the footnote would be what we have.
You would think.
Okay.
Which is, it's frustrating because that's how we do it in Greek. In Greek, we pick the best option of all the options. We pick the best one. That's what goes in the text. And everything else is a footnote. But not Hebrew.
That means the Masoretes are just so almost untouchable.
I guess. I don't know. I don't know if it's Jewish tradition. I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about that. If it's so odd that we do not have a critical text of the Old Testament. You would think that we would, because our New Testament is a critical text, which is part of what makes me think that there are no Jews obviously involved in the New Testament process. So maybe that's why we have a critical text there where the experts have made the decisions and said, this is what we think the best option is. And then they actually grade the footnotes. So if they think it's option A, then in the footnote, if there was a variant, they will give you a grade, A, B, C, or D, of how certain they are that they chose the right one.
That seems extremely helpful.
It's very helpful. And actually have a commentary that goes with it that actually tells you why they made the decision that they made.
That's
That
really
you can,
helpful.
that's very helpful. So if you ever had a question as to why did they pick this one, why is this one given a D instead of an A, you can open up that commentary and it'll tell you, well, we have these 7 ancient manuscripts, and when you take Greek and Greek exegesis, they'll tell you that the footnote, there are certain families of manuscripts, and there's ones that are represented by Hebrew characters, there's ones that are represented by capital English letters, there are ones that are represented by numbers. And for the most part, the best ones are the ones that start with the Hebrew letters. And then if there's like P whatever is a very good text. And there's some that are more famous than others. And so when you see that one, you're like, oh, that's got some good weight to it because that's a really good manuscript. Very old, very, one of the, probably from 1st or 2nd century. It's been, just verified so many times over. So if it shows up in that manuscript, it's probably good. We'll give it an A. And then other times they'll tell you, yeah, we've got like 3 manuscripts that have this variant in it. We think it makes sense, but we're going to give it a D because we've only got 3. And, we're going with this because that's what Jerome had. And Jerome's good, but he's not perfect. So we'll give it a C. But they'll tell you why they picked a particular one. Whereas here, and this has been one of the complaints all along with the Hebrew Bible, they only went with what was in the Leningrad Codex, B19A. That's the manuscript. That's what they went with. And any changes they put in a footnote, but only, at least in this version, only if the editor thought it was important. So sometimes you look at the footnotes and you're like, you put a footnote about the fact that the Vav is missing, Bob and Larry and Steve, Jim. And you're going to put a footnote that says there should have been a Vav with Jim. As though we couldn't figure that out. You wasted the space to do that. And then you left out the fact that there's this major textual variant because it all was the whim of what the editor wanted to do. So
to offend Jewish
that's the only thing I can figure. Because even the BHSQ, which is the new version, is still B19A. It's still the received text that we've gotten from the Leningrad Codex, better footnotes. So the footnotes are superb in the new version, but it's still, we leave the errors in rather than putting the correction in, which is just, it's very odd. Because even we left all the Ketiv Karez in as well, where it's the Ketiv is how it's written in the text and the Karez is how it's supposed to be read. So the Masoretes even would put on the side column, and I don't see any on this particular page, but they would actually note, this is not the correct reading. So they left it in. They left in the error and changed it. So there are two forms of Jerusalem. There's Jerusalem and Jerusalem, and one of them is the correct version and one is not. But they put them both in and then they just note it with the footnote. So even they did the same thing because they didn't want to change the consonantal text. So I think that's it. We don't want to offend the Jews, but at least for biblical scholarship, seeing as the majority of Gentile scholars are not Christians, it's somewhat ironic that we're so concerned about offending the Jews. But
And then on the previous verse, the Daniel. That's threw me. The standing participle, but then the still. What's with the new?
The new is that archaic form of him.
I figured that to be 3MS, but I couldn't figure out why. Sometimes
Yep.
it's do, but
So it's a 3ms pronominal suffix and a paragogic nun.
because it has that staple. Oh, okay, that's what I couldn't figure out.
Yeah, so it's just a weird form. So it's a
Forgot about this.
a participle following an adverbial accusative meaning yet again or still. So
Yes.
still him.
Still him standing.
Yeah, still him standing. So the ESV says still stood. King James Version says yet stood. NIV remain standing.
Okay.
So it's odd because the only thing I can figure is that they didn't want to put it on the infinitive absolute, the new.
Yeah.
So his standing still would have made more sense. It was still his standing. You would expect the new to be on the infinitive construct, but for whatever reason they put it on the first one and left omade as an absolute. Why, I'm not really sure. Seems like it would be easier just to.
I mean, I have lots of questions.
Yeah,
about why things are
I hope there are a
the way
lot of
they are.
Christian Masoretes because I have a lot of questions when we get to heaven. You did what? What were you thinking? What were you thinking?
I just need more information here.
Yeah, explain this one to me. Yeah. So you will not, would you surely sweep away Zadik im Rasha? How do you translate that?
Assumed the righteous, the wicked,
Okay.
the righteous ones,
Mhm.
the wicked ones, or something like that.
Yeah. Why? What made you put the in there?
Because A doesn't sound good.
A doesn't sound good.
I don't know though. I was like,
Uh-huh.
I guess we're assumed. I mean, that's how the biblical language works. Is it should be a righteous one or a wicked one.
Yeah.
But I know this text, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, it's got to be the. But where are they getting that from?
Yep. All the major translations put the.
It also just sounds better.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really mean anything.
Would you sweep
different.
away righteous with guilty?
Yep.
It just sounds choppy.
Yep. Will you even swipe away a righteous one with a wicked one?
For some reason, it took me my brain was like, righteous if guilty, righteous then guilty.
Yes. Im is a sneaky one because there's an aleph mem that's if. Yeah. So will you even sweep away a righteous one with a wicked one, or swipe away the righteous with the wicked? Yeah. And then we come to verse 24. Donna, you want to read part of that? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Ish. Hamishim.
Mm-hmm.
Hamishim. Zadik.
Mm-hmm.
Batok.
Mm-hmm.
Ear. Hawk.
Mm-hmm.
Below T Lama Home La Ma'an Hamishim. Matzadikim Asher Bakar
Kirba. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Very good.
Don't ask me what it means.
Well, the beginning of verse 24, ulai. Do you know that word, ulai? It's kind of an interrogative.
My footnote told me.
Oh, there you go.
I didn't know
Yes.
what it meant.
Perhaps. Perhaps. Ulai. Perhaps. Yep. Yeah, that's the dictionary form. Ulai. Perhaps. And yesh is my professor called it the reality to potentiality particle of existence. It's a fancy way of saying there are. If there are. It's the opposite of ain. Ain is there are not, there is not. This is yesh, there is or there are. And then hamishim is a number. Hamesh.
Hamesh is 5.
So hamishim is 50. Yep. So perhaps there are 50 righteous batok in the midst of the city. Perhaps. And then we got our question again. Ha'af, will you surely tispes, sweep away, velo tisa, and not, what is tisa? Pardon.
See, for some reason, I put lift up
Yes.
or bear or carry,
Correct.
but nowhere did it say pardon, but that makes so much more sense in English to my brain.
It does. It's technically lift up, but this is very idiomatic. So the full phrase would be lift up his face upon you, which is part of the Aaronic blessing. Or lift up his countenance upon you. So to lift up your face upon somebody is to forgive them or to show them favor. So your face falling upon them, that's a bad thing. You don't want your face falling on somebody. You don't want it falling off for one thing. You certainly don't want it landing on somebody. Yes, no, face falling sounds really bad. Yes, and it is. So the face falling, almost we say crestfallen, which is usually more guilt or sadness, but it's more the picture of disappointment.
I just had to there. I'm so sorry. My brain was like, geez, because I just saw your socks.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I didn't just guess.
yeah,
for
no, it's okay. I have cheese on my socks. It's okay. The falling upon is bad. The lifting up your face is good. But this doesn't say face. It just says lifting up to the place. But it's kind of this idiom of will you not forgive? Will you not lift up to the place? Not lifting up the place. The place is the indirect object. Even as we saw in the lecture for today, the lamed preposition is often used to mark that indirect object. So on behalf of the city, will you not lift up face or lift up your countenance or something on behalf of the city? That's the idea that's taking place here.
So is pardon
It's the word nasa, to lift.
but is there is it almost always translated as pardon, or is there a place where it's in the English it'll say lift up?
There's a couple places where we leave it. The blessing of Aaron is one where we leave it, because there's a number of different like close synonyms to it of lift face, lift countenance, lift. Actually, in Numbers it is lift face. We translate it as countenance, but may the Lord lift His face to you. But there's a number of places where we leave it as lift.
But it's never like a physical, like lifting someone up.
It's not. Yeah, it's. I'm trying to think. I know there's at least one or two places where it's pretty clear what's happened. Like I feel like in Esther maybe it talks about how when Haman realizes that he's done for, that the face of the king basically had fallen on him. There's a lot of face stuff. You know, the words of Esther came out stuck to his face, and the face of King Artaxerxes, or whoever the king happens to be, you know, it falls on him. I think that's there. So there's a couple places where we leave it just because it's poetic and sounds really cool, but a lot of places it's forgive. And so what becomes tough for the exegete then is when we go back to the Hebrew and we see what it is, what the word is, then that's part of where our job then as well, even as we'll do word studies. We did the word study lecture, right? Part 1.
Mm-hmm.
Is that for today? Yeah. So even when we do those word studies of, okay, it's translated this way, but why? Why is there this lifting? What's lifting? And that's where you get into, okay, it's lifting the face. It's lifting it's kind of lifting an acceptance to the person of, kind of lifting your, I mean, there's just a number of different pictures that are taking place there, which really adds then to the nuance of the verb of, yeah, it's forgive, but there's a lot of words for forgive. And the fact that this one was chosen has some connotations to it of God's face was really turned down upon Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham is asking, lift your gaze maybe from them.
And it's interesting to me because it's used in a couple times in these verses to lift up, and the idiom is the lifting up of the face, and it's used alongside like angry, but that's also nose.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you get a lot of these pictures within the Old Testament that are very idiomatic. Probably the most famous one because of the guy who actually preached a sermon on it. But there's one where instead of the phrase "man," it talks about the one who pees on the wall is the phrase. And there's a very famous sermon, infamous sermon, maybe a better way to put it, because it's a horrible sermon. But there's an infamous sermon where a guy basically railed against Bible translations that take out the whole phrase because he says it's a neutering of manhood. And, they're trying to get us all to sit down when we pee. And I mean, it's just, he goes off on this whole tangent that's just so bizarre. And you just want to be like, look, it's an idiom. It shows up a couple places. In one place, it doesn't even refer to males. It's supposed to be graphic because it's supposed to be from the king all the way down to the beggar who's peeing in the gutter. So from highest to lowest is the picture. And then in other cases, it's actually just supposed to be the men, the ones who are peeing on the walls out back, those guys. So, there's a couple places where it's meant to be read in a couple different ways.
Right.
So part of the work then of the exegete with Nasa, because it could even be lifting up your anger maybe from the city, your condemnation. I mean, there's a number of things that can be lifted. Usually it's face, but even there it implies, if my face has fallen, then I'm angry. So the work of the exegete then is to go back and to look at what the words are and to see, okay, what is the greater nuance that's being explained here of, when we hear forgiveness, we think, oh, Jesus died on the cross for our sins, that's forgiveness. Well, Abraham is not thinking in terms of, he's not thinking atonement, he's not thinking the covering up of sins, he's not thinking blood sacrifice, he's not thinking, He's not thinking any of that, which, if it was the word kafar, to atone or to redeem, ransom, well, then maybe. If it was ga'al, to redeem. So this is where word choice becomes important, that we can go back and look and say, okay, he says forgive, he says pardon, but he's talking about it in a specific context. Because often what people will do is they're reading their English Bible, they see the word forgive, they read a different passage, Isaiah 53, forgive, oh, forgive, yep, that's the Messiah that, well, no, you can't connect those because they're not even the same word. And so that's where our job comes in of, well, yes, that's what it says, and you can read it and get the idea in your English Bible, but now we're going to kind of step behind it and say, okay, this is what the Hebrew text says, and this gives just a little bit of nuance. And so maybe potentially in a Bible study or in a sermon, it might just be one sentence. You might even say, Abraham says, forgive. Literally in the Hebrew, he says, lift up, like lift up your anger from the city, lift up your face from looking down on the city, because that's what it said up in verse 20, I think. They looked down on the city. So there's a lifting up. I mean, you might just mention it, or if it doesn't fit into the sermon, you might not mention it at all. But at least in your study of, okay, if this plays into the overall point of the message, then I'm going to mention it. Then I'm going to bring out the fact that this is in there. You might not mention the fact that that it's a God standing before Abraham, but it might, if you're talking about intercessory prayer, it might bring out an interesting nuance to say, God knew what he was going to do, and yet he was still putting Abraham in the driver's seat, waiting for him to do something, waiting for him to act. So, you might bring out something like that. So we're kind of going back behind the English to find it out, which is one of the exciting things about Hebrew, I think. So will you not forgive the place? And then lama'an, which is actually a compound word, sort of. Altogether just means on account of or because of. On account of the 50 righteous, which are in its midst. So will you not forgive the place on account of the 50 righteous, which are technically in her midst? The Bakir Ba. Although there in verse 24, one of the manuscripts says Bakir Bo, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but which is why he's got a question mark at the footnote. That always fills you with confidence. The editor put a question mark. Who knows?
Honestly. That also just feels aggressive to me. Like,
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. Nobody's really sure what they were thinking. That's kind of funny. Okay, so verse 25. Somebody want to read 25?
Hallelujah. Is that Hallelujah?
It'd be Halila.
Hallelujah. Laka.
Mm-hmm.
Measot.
Mm-hmm.
Kadamar. Hazer. Lahamit. Zadik in Rasha. By Bahari. I still don't even know how to say that. By Bahariya.
Mm-hmm.
Kad Zadik. Karasha.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's still going on. Halila. Lak.
This one would just be Lak.
Lak.
Mm-hmm.
Hashofet. Kal. Haaretz. Lo. Ya'aseh Mishpat.
Very good.
Every time I get to something like fire, it's like pirates. You just need to stop. And I know exactly what that word is. I know exactly how to say it. And I appreciate it so much more because I know exactly what it is.
Yep. So can you translate that?
Wow, I remember not liking this verse. Be it far from you to do. That's what I got. Be it far from you to do like as or according. The cough there was weird.
The coughs in this verse
So like
really threw
be
me
it
off.
far from you to do this thing or like this thing, to kill, to cause to be executed, to cause to put to death, the righteous with the wicked. And then I got stuck with the, where was it? The CalPerfect Grammars from Haya. What are they trying to say? And he or it is, becomes, or takes place as the righteous like the wicked. I'm like, what is he trying to say here? And they cleaned it up really well in the text, but.
Yeah, this ends up being almost like a vav consecutive, where the v'haya seems to go with lahamit, to put to death the righteous with the wicked, so that, or as a consequence, or because of, thus, it is that the righteous is like the wicked.
Why is the comp on both the righteous and the wicked?
Yeah, this ends up being a comparative. So as the righteous, or as the righteous, so the wicked, or as the wicked, so the righteous. So the vahaya is so that this state exists. So the vav, even though again we don't really have a vakatal form, so it's almost context of to put to death a righteous one with a wicked one, so that as with the righteous, so also the wicked.
So what is lakah?
On the first one there,
Yeah.
far be it from you.
And why does it change?
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll discuss that.
I
Yep.
just couldn't figure out what lakah was enough to also think what lak was. And I couldn't even figure out, I was like, when you take it apart, it's lak and ka. Like I don't know what to take apart to even look up here.
Those weird pronominal suffixes that are attached to prepositions. They
It's
throw you.
I could not for the life of me figure it out. And I was like, I guess I'm just going to put a blue box around this because I have no idea what it is. And I've spent so much time doing it. I have to move on or I will never finish the verse. What is meashot? What is that? What's the root of that?
That is at the end of the verse. Oh, I'm.
So back at the beginning, after the first line.
Yes. Well, you tell me. What is that?
I don't know. It's in a blue box. It's like I couldn't figure
It's in a blue box.
So a couple of things in blue boxes that I couldn't figure out. So it's in seeds in the blue box. I don't know. I have no idea.
That was also, because that's the infinitive construct from Sa, but it's also got a mem added onto it. And I'm not
Where
sure.
did the mem come from?
The mem is just a preposition, because prepositions like to be added onto constructs. So,
But the mem doesn't mean anything.
but is it one of those two there talking about where it's not necessarily, is this one actually translated as from, or would it be more of a?
Well, if it's far be it, then it's far be it from doing.
So even though
Yeah.
far be it is over here, the from is over here.
Yeah, in a sense.
Because when I looked it up in the lexicon, they were like, be it far from, and that's what I took that first word to mean. So then I was like,
Mhm.
it would be kind of doubling the from, but is that what they're trying to do there?
Yeah, because you almost expect it, be it far from you,
Yes.
but almost a more literal way would let it be rendered to you as far from doing. So the lamed is not really from. It's not really be far from you. It's be far from doing. So the lock is not really from you. We translate it that way.
Is that just like an indirect object?
Yeah, it's almost like let it be for you far from doing that.
Okay.
So it's almost a possessive. Let your doing, or let you
Yes.
be far from doing that. Even though we translate it far be it from you to do.
Yeah.
If we were being exact, we would say far be it on your behalf, or far be it on your account, or far be it, let it be rendered to you as far from doing this. So that lock is almost more of a your doing should be far. So
it was convoluted. It wasn't.
Oh, it's convoluted, and part of it is that phrase halilah.
It was just weird because I was like, this one, I know what's going on. This one, blue boxes everywhere. I was like, how do I know
Yeah,
what's going on so clearly to having no idea?
I've actually come across a lexicon that has halilah as God forbid, which is hilarious if you're talking to God. God forbid that you would, yeah.
You forbid that you should do this.
Yes. So I think in other instances, when David says it or someone else, we sometimes translate it as God forbid that I would, but yeah, far be it. Well, I think David will sometimes say, far be it from me. Halilah li, but it's still not far be it from me. It's
No idea.
it's let my being be far from.
Lee makes sense to my brain. Why Laka made no sense to my brain makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Because Lee, I'm like, oh, I know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep. And actually, that second laka, I flipped my notes here. Actually, yeah.
Why is it different?
Well, it's funny on. Yeah, here I've got. I didn't even note it in my notes. I've just got. It's still a 2ms suffix from you.
It is, but one's masculine and one's feminine, right?
Possibly. The one part of it that might be different is that if we had the normal form, it would be lakaha, lakaha, because the next word is ha shofet, lakaha shofet. So it's possible that it's just that it's a more of a pausal form. So that instead of laka, it's lak, and the accent is on the lamed, because that allows the pronunciation to go from lakaha to lakha.
I have a quick question.
That's a guess. There's a couple places where they do that. Because yeah, ka would be feminine, but you would have lamed. It must be like lick, because you would have lamed with a schwa and kaf with a schwa.
I mean, it's
Which, yeah.
I didn't notice it at first because I'm slightly dyslexic, so it's just it's diagonally switched.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, my guess is just the use of the accent there. The fact that they deliberately put the accent on the other part.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
If we can loop back for just a second.
Sure.
On Haza, after Kadavar,
Mm-hmm.
is that ha an interrogative particle?
Mm-mm.
Okay, because I could not, that's also in a blue box. And I was trying to figure it out because I was like, it's not going to be the this. But I was thinking,
Yes. Because
I
if
was
you look
trying to
under
think if that
the,
would be where the question, that question-ish might be in the, how could you do this, be it far from you?
yes, the under the cough, you see the patak.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the definite article, because normally cough has a vocal schwa, kadavar.
Right.
So kadavar is the thing. So then hazeh has to have the definite article. So it's this thing. So this is
That makes more sense.
an attributive use of that definite article. Yeah. So yeah. So then he says, "Far be it from you," and then will not. Can I keep translating there, sir? Will not.
Oh, sorry. Where are you something?
End of verse 25.
Far be it from you. This one was a little weird too. The participle, cal participle, judge or judgment. I'm assuming it's the judge.
Uh-huh.
Of is assumed all the earth.
Mm-hmm.
He does not he does justice.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Literally.
Yep. So will not the judge of all the earth not do justice?
Not be. Yeah.
Yep. So won't the shofet do mishpat?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then God says, verse 26. Somebody want to read that?
Vayomer Adonai im Emsa Bisadon Hamishim Sadikim Batog Ha'ir Banasati Lakal Hamakom Ba'avu Bam.
Ram.
Ba'avubam? What?
Ram. Ba'avuram.
Ba'avuram.
Uh-huh. Yep. And can you translate it?
And he said, and the Lord said, if you find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, I will pardon the place because of them.
Mm-hmm. The whole place.
The whole place.
Yep. Lakol hamakom. Ba'avuram. Yep. And it's probably not an accident that it's Ba'avuram, since he's talking to Avraham. So it's funny what different authors like to do. And I think because of the fact that Hebrew is a very oral language, there was also a great tendency for them to slip in these things. They would also do the where you'd have a bunch of words that would start with the same letter, like we do in English. Alliteration for us is a big thing. Like if you've ever read the book Mr. Popper's Penguins, there's the character Penny, I think is her name, that always talks. She doesn't say anything that doesn't start with the letter P, which in the movie is quite impressive because she says a lot. And that actress had to say everything that started with the letter P. She did an amazing job. So for us, that's a big deal. And in the Psalms, that's also a big deal. But they call it assonance, where it sounds the same. And that was very big for Jewish poets or Hebrew poets, that they really liked that. So it wasn't meant to be humorous. I think it was supposed to aid in the oral recitation of, is that a word, recitation? The recitation of this particular phrase.
I listened very briefly when they put Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the court's last stay, and they had a rabbi there, and they sang Psalm 23.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, do you know what? I was like, well, I don't know, but yeah, we all can get that one. And it was to hear someone who actually knows what they're doing and not my own brain. The singing of it, I was like, it was just easy to hear like how the rhythm of it is built into the language.
Yep.
It was really interesting.
Yeah, it's very fascinating the way that those psalms have been. There's still a lot of debate on meter, but it's pretty cool the way they do it. Even if people are like, yeah, we don't know what the meter sounded like, this is what I came up with, I still think that's cool.
Yeah.
Because it just sounds, it's meant to be a sung language.
Yes.
I was talking with some sixth graders earlier this week, and I realized Greek just doesn't sound as cool.
No.
Hebrew has even with the oohs and the news at the end of words, that it just has a kind of a cadence to it. Even if there's not a cadence, there's still a cadence, because it just sounds like it should. It sounds like you should chant it, regardless of how you read it. It just sounds that way. And
I can still remember the rhythm of a lot of the prayers we
Yeah.
did at singers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we sang it all. They
Yeah.
sing it all. And I can still hear that in my head.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even the fact that he repeats it there in verse 25, that he repeats what he's saying. Halila laka ma'asot kadavar haza lachamit zadik im rasha vahaya kadazik karasha halila lak. Of, you've just kind of got this rhythm. Far be it from you, blah, 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 blah. Far be it from you to do this thing, the righteous with the wicked, and the righteous with the wicked. Far be it from you. There's just a real great, almost chiastic structure to it that just would aid if you were memorizing this. It's a little bit more foreign to us. I had a professor that always used to try to challenge us to memorize everything in Hebrew, and none of us did. But he had memorized big chunks in Hebrew, and it is a fascinating thing to be able to chant it in your head. And I was trying to memorize Psalm 1 for a while there in Hebrew, because I just thought that'd be kind of cool to be able to recite it. And if I really think about it, I can remember parts of it. But just to have that in your mind and to be able to hear it, Ashrei Haish,
It makes the verb of to study or murmur out loud make a lot more sense. Not that it doesn't make sense, but when you hear it sung or chanted, it's like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. That it will be out loud. Yeah,
and I think it even sticks out more in Hebrew because we don't know it. So when we hear the same word all over and over again, Ashrei Haish, velo, da 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 da, velo, and you're and then you hear it. And so even if you were listening to it, Ashrei Haish, and then you hear all the way to the end of Psalm 2, and then you hear again Ashrei Haish, you're like, oh, there it is again. You can hear it, even if you don't know Hebrew. You can hear it. It just has a great sound to it. So, so God says, yeah, sure, I'll spare it. And then Abraham is emboldened, so he goes on in verse 27. Donna, you want to read verse 27?
Sure.
Vaya'an.
Abraham.
Vayomar. Or Vayomar. Sorry.
Hene, na, Halal, Halatico, Halti, La Davar, is that how you say it? La Davar?
Or Daver.
Davar. El, Adonai. Oh, okay. Niki,
Anoki.
Niki, Afar, Fair.
Yep. And if you look out to the left, you see the bait preposition all the way to the left. It says 28 with a bait. Bait with a dot over it. So that means that phrase, afar va'afer, shows up twice in the Bible. Once here. And where's the other one?
Dust and ashes.
Would the other one be in Job?
Yes.
No.
Yes. Job 42. Yep. And I repent in dust and ashes. Yep. Yep. Very good. So Vaya'an is he answered. And Vayak tolls prefer that jussive form. So that's why the hay is missing. Ana. The hay drops. And then Vayak tolls also bump the accent back one. So instead of va'ana, it's va'ya'an, but it's va'ya'an. So because of that, that last syllable becomes a closed, unaccented syllable. So it has to have a short vowel. So the Vayak tolls end up with all sorts of weird vowel patterns. So it's just I believe it's just a cow, but it looks really weird because of the shifting of everything. But that's very common for Vayak tolls to do that. And he says, behold, please, really behold me. What is hol alti?
There's a note in mine that says undertake, venture, or decide.
Yeah, show willingness, be pleased to do.
So I would assume a perfect ending. Because it's T. Or is it something else?
It is actually a, I have it down as a Hifil imperfect.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think that's correct. Yeah, I would think that's a perfect. I don't know why I have imperfect here. Yeah, because
Well, is the hay part of the word? Is that where you handle?
It's a Hifil, so that's correct. And because it's a one yod verb, it becomes ho, because Hifils always have ho if there's a
So what is it?
yod.
Y'all or something?
Ya'al. Yeah.
So that would be Hifil perfect.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it should be Hifil perfect, one common singular. I don't know why I have imperfect here. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Yeah, I think you're right. Hifil perfect. Because I have undertaken. to speak. Yeah, because dever is to speak. So I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, and I am but dust and ashes. Although this is a verbalist clause, and I, dust and ash. So one of the frustrating things with Hebrew exegesis and advanced grammar is there's just so much advanced grammar, and I've been trying to put it in a logical order, but
There seems to be.
well, in order to, you try to start at the smallest, so we started with accent marks, and then we went, we had to do genre just to get that out of the way, but then word choice, and then syntax is the relationship between words. But so it made sense to do word studies before we do syntax. But verbalist clauses are really a syntax issue, but we've been seeing them since day one.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so we're going to get to this eventually. So by the time we get to our final lectures, we're going to be like, yeah, we've been seeing this since week one. Now you're going to tell us this is helpful.
Well, yeah, but then it'll
But
make sense.
it will.
Well,
I
guess I'm
can't.
supposed to infer this.
I can't give it all.
Unfortunately, you can't know
Yeah.
what you can't know, and you have to start somewhere.
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't watch 4-hour lectures for 2 weeks.
No, I've been trying to keep them around 20, 25 minutes if I can. So, and somewhat basing some of it off of what we discuss in class of what we seem to be struggling with. And so this is a verbalist clause. They're very common, but like you said, I, dust, ash, you could figure out what he means. I am dust and ashes. So, yeah. So then he says in verse 28, Ulai Yachsarun ha-mishim ha-tzadakim ha-misha. Perhaps the righteous 50 lack, which is the Yachsarun. They lack. Hasar is to lack. So this is Yachsaru, they lack. And then we've got that paragogic nun on the end of that word, and it's just a cal imperfect Yachsarun paragogic nun, because then we've got a chet that starts the next word, hamishim, and the 50 hamishim does not have the definite article. But ha-tzadakim is definite. So the ha-tzadakim, ha-misha, is the 50 is the subject. Ha-mishim is what's lacking. The righteous 5. So it's not what if the righteous 50 lacks 5. Technically, it would be what if the 50 are lacking 5 righteous ones.
Why does he have the interrogative article with so many words?
On
Not.
Which one? On
Well, it's on
that's just
5,
the
50, and
yes. So that is just the standard form for 5.
oh, it's just got that.
Yep, chamesh has that. Well, the chamesh should be chet with a vowel, and then mesh a seire. But then when you make it feminine, hamisha, and numbers are weird because a feminine number goes with a masculine thing, which is bizarre. So when you have hamishim, now I think it's a kametz, there might be a patak, but I think it's a kametz that's under the hate. It reduces because now it's too far from the accent. And since it takes a compound shva, it ends up looking like the interrogative
I
particle.
just noticed there are hates instead of haze. The font in mine has just like one tiny sliver.
Yes. Yep.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yep. Hatashit bahamisha et kol ha'ir. Will you ruin which is the hatashit. Will you ruin from shachat, meaning to that is a interrogative particle. The hey with the compound shva, and then the tav is actually the hifil subject marker.
So just
Tashhit.
ruin, destroy, or spoil.
Yep. Yeah, the ESV, NIV, King James Version all go with destroy. Shachat usually means to ruin. So we destroy it. And then the bait that is there on Hamisha is when you put a bait on a cardinal number, it forms a prepositional phrase that is used to indicate the cause of the ruin. So will you destroy because of 5, or will you destroy at 5, or on account of 5? Yeah. On account of the 5, the whole city. So again, this is one of those weird usages of bait. Bait and al have that weird overlap. Sometimes they just seem to interchange with each other. Vayomer lo ashhit im emtsa sham arba'im v'chamisha. And he says, I am reading the right verse. Did I skip a verse? No, that's right, verse 29. And God says, I will not destroy if I find there 40 and 5. Vayosef od, so he's going to ask again. Ladavar, a live. Vayomer, and he undertook again to speak to him, saying, Ulai yimsaun sham arba'im. Vayomer lo a'eseh ba'avur ha'arva'im. So he speaks to him again. Perhaps yimsaun, perhaps there are only found, because this is a nifal, perhaps there's only found there 40. And he says, lo e'eseh, I will not do it on account of the 40. Vayomer al na yechar, do not be angry, la Adoni, my Lord. Va'adavera, and I will speak. Perhaps yimtsaun sham shaloshim, perhaps there are found there 30. Vayomer lo e'eseh im emtsa sham shaloshim, I will not do it if I find 30. Vayomer henena ho'alti ladavar el Adonai, which is the same phrase that we saw earlier. Behold, now I have undertaken to speak to my Lord. Perhaps ulai yimtsaun sham esrim, perhaps there's only found 20. Vayomer lo ashhit ba'avur ha'esrim, I will not destroy or ruin on account of the 20. Vayomer al na yechar ladoni va'adavra ad hapa'am. Ach hapa'am. I will undertake again to speak to you. Sorry, I think ach is yet again or yet another time. Surely, although Brown Driver Briggs suggests that it's used restrictively, so that the literal translation is surely the occurrence, but more idiomatically it would just be this once. So this is more or less Abraham's last plea. This is it. This is the final time. This is as low as I'm going. And where was I? Ach hapa'am ulai yimtsaun sham asara there's only found 10. Vayomer lo ashhit ba'avur ha'asra. I will not destroy on account of the 10. Vayelek Adonai, so the Lord leaves. Ka asher kila, just as he finished. La daver, to speak. El Avraham. Abraham shav lamakomo. And Abraham returned to his place. And that's the end of the story. Until we get to chapter 19, and the men, Yava'u Shanei Hamalakim, now they're angels. Before they were men. So 2 angels go down. Although the footnote here thinks we're dumb. So it says probably Ha'anoshim from verses 12 and 16. So just in case you couldn't figure it out.
So they put that in there, but not the, hey, we switched this and this is probably not the right text.
Yeah, although he does have, back on the earlier page, he does have the 22 A to A, Tik Soph, Lect Orig. So he does note that they changed it. But you'll notice he just says Tik Soph in hopes that you can figure out what a Tik Soph is. He gives no other textual evidence for that. He just says, Masoret said they put this in. But yeah, he'll put that in. So that's why sometimes it annoys me of, really? You're going to put that in? Like even here, the footnote in, where was the one that I saw? On, 27, verse 27a, keeps saying Adonai.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, many of the medieval manuscripts say Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part of you that wants to go, well, duh. Come on, seriously? Come on. That's not even that significant of a, yeah. I never really noticed it, and then I started reading books that talked about just how ridiculous the footnotes are. Broadsman and Tully talk about it quite a bit, that there's, James Barr he's a big linguistic guy and is most famous for all the books that he's written against other people. He's a happy guy, yeah. He has written his own books, and he's got his own Old Testament theology, but I don't know of anybody who knows him for that. What they know him for is just his blasting of bad scholarship. And so there's actually, I think I mentioned the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. It's been updated, but the original version, he wrote his book, Biblical Semantics, just trashing how just awful. Updated? That was probably one of the reasons. He just talks about all the fallacies that are in that. He wrote a book on how worthless the footnotes are in BHS. So again, that's what he's most famous for, being the angry guy who yells at people that they're stupid. They deserve it, so he's not wrong, but
you also don't want to be known as the guy that just yells at people.
Yeah, it's funny.
Like kitchen guy that just likes
kinda
for cooking. He's
yeah,
just a good little scholar.
And maybe he's a super nice guy. I don't know, but everything I read by him is him talking about how dumb other people are. Yeah. So I don't know. He's got some stuff. He's written some stuff on theophany, a few articles that I've come across where he doesn't bash anybody. But when I think of James Barr, I think, don't get on his bad side. So we know how the story is going to end. Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. But I think, Sarah, you brought up the point earlier but Abraham has seen the mercy of God, that God is the judge of all the earth, and he's not willing to sweep away the righteous with the wicked. And he makes that point explicitly clear in chapter 19 because he can't find 10 people. He can't even find 5. So, where should Abraham stop? I think Abraham stopped here because he thought to himself, okay, we got Lot, we got 2 daughters, we got 2 husbands, and we got a wife. So that's 6. Surely we could find 4 more people in Sodom and Gomorrah. But he can't. Which also highlights then how great the outcry was that had come up against, we often forget that the Bible is not always exaggerating when it says things. Noah alone was blameless in his generation. don't think that's poetic.
Hmm.
I think it's really he
Noah
alone was
alone.
righteous. It almost implies, although it does specify his generation, but you almost wonder how righteous were his sons and his daughters-in-law.
Yeah, but did they get included because God was merciful to Noah and
I think so.
his children because of the
Yep.
covenant?
And God clearly was willing to do that and did that deliberately, because if God was not interested in the covenant, he had a 500-year window where Noah had no children.
Yeah.
And he waits until he has children, and then in his 600 years sends the flood. So this all could have taken place 100 years earlier. It would have just been Noah, no wicked people on earth, just Noah. It's just Noah and his wife on the boat. Then when they finish with the boat, then they have their children and they start these, this new righteous group of people. But he doesn't. I think, again, to emphasize that God in the Old Testament works through his covenant families.
I thought that, and this may be like heretical or whatever, so you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Probably.
But this passage reminds me of when God covers Moses in the face of the rock and shows him part of his glory.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's almost doing the same thing to Abraham. He's showing Abraham his glory in mercy rather than in power.
Yeah.
But he's almost having the same sort of Moses in the rock.
Yes. Very similar, because in that story in Exodus 33, he says, the Lord, slow to anger and abounding in chesed and loving kindness and grace and mercy, and passing the covenant on to generations of those who love me. And you see that of, I don't even know how righteous Lot's daughters were, because we know how that worked out.
Yeah.
So that even raises, not so much. But even then but God sees Lot, rescues Lot, and then by extension rescues his daughters and his wife, because they're part of that same household. And throughout the Old Testament, he really emphasizes household. That's really the emphasis that takes place there. And Lot's wife is clearly not righteous, because she looks back and gets turned into a pillar of salt. But so they go down there and they're looking for 10 people and they can't find them. They only find one. They find Lot. That's it. And if it weren't for 2 Peter, we would probably think they were mistaken in Lot's diagnosis as a righteous man. But Peter tells us that he was righteous. And he does leave. His sons-in-law don't want to leave. His wife doesn't want to leave. He does leave. So maybe it's just a little bit of faith. In fact, I'm pretty convinced that's why Peter chose that example. You got Noah. Well, it's Noah, of course. And then you got Lot. And you're like, well, if Noah's the standard, then I'm in trouble. But hey, I got Lot beat. I've not had children by my children. So, hey, I'm doing pretty good compared to Lot.
Low bar.
Very low bar. It was you just got to leave. That's it. There's no other requirement. You just got to believe our word enough to leave the city, and you'll be saved. So, that idea of faith, I think that's pretty significant, I think, in why Peter chose Lot, which is an encouragement, great encouragement to me. But even then, God could have wiped out Lot with Sodom and Gomorrah, because the deal was 10. And yet the principle that's at work here is, will you wipe away the righteous with the wicked?
He doesn't. He still destroys the city, but he actually gives the righteous and their children.
Yep. So he says, no, I'm not going to destroy the righteous. I'm not going to destroy the family of the righteous, because I pass on my faithfulness to the future generations. So I'm going to emphasize my covenant faithfulness, even though Abraham said 10. So it's interesting, as Abraham is debating with God, Abraham seems very focused on the number. Is it 50? Is it 40? Is it 30? Is it 20? Is it 10? And then when the story doesn't turn out the way that we would have expected, because we expect in the next chapter that he's going to find 10, he doesn't find 10. So we expect either he found 10, didn't destroy the city, or we're going to expect he didn't find 10, he killed everybody. And instead, he goes back to the very first thing Abraham said, should not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And yet, Abraham, even saying that, still barters with him on the basis of number. And it's not about the number. And I don't know at what point Abraham put 2 and 2 together and realized it's not about the number. It was about the first thing I said. God will do justice.
Well, do you think that, I've always wondered, do you think Abraham was surprised when, I don't think he was surprised when he saw in the distance that Sodom and Gomorrah blew up. See, I'm sure you can see that from a long way away.
Mm-hmm.
But was he surprised when he sees Lot? Or when Lot escapes? When he hears Lot's, he's still alive?
Yeah.
Was he surprised or was he not?
I don't know. I almost wonder if at first he was surprised and then thought, that makes sense. You know, if he thought about it. But even then, I think that would be the amazement of, there's the amazement of, God listened to my prayer. I just debated and bartered with the God of the universe on behalf of this city because I'm concerned about my nephew. And yet I didn't go far enough. But God is so merciful and so gracious and so kind that he knew what was my heart's desire. So even though Abraham never comes out and says, my wayward nutcase of a nephew lives in that town, because we're debating about Sodom here. Gomorrah is not even mentioned. So it was mentioned in the beginning, but I think it's significant. We're only talking about one town. Like Abraham, it's almost as though Abraham is saying, look, Lot lives in Sodom. So, well, sorry, Gomorrah, you don't have Lot. So I don't care about you. You know, so he.
But then why didn't he ask God, can you save Lot and just destroy the city? Because he actually asked to save the city.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
It's very weird. So I almost, I don't know. That's an interesting question. Is it he thought maybe there was the possibility that Lot had gone wicked too? I don't know.
I've always thought that dude, I have a cousin. He's he's been in Sodom for how many years?
Yep.
I know of his sons-in-laws.
Yep.
And well, Lord, maybe you can find him righteous people so you don't fall for family. Because I don't have much hope for him.
That's possible. Maybe that's why he didn't go any lower. Because he figured, well, I can't even count on my nephew's family to actually be righteous. So I can't go to 5 thinking you'll spare it because of 5, because I'm not overly confident that the 5 of them are righteous. Yeah, that does make sense as to why he would then stop at 10 of, I sure hope there's 10. But yeah, I wonder if when he looked out then and he sees Sodom and Gomorrah burning in the distance, if he thinks, well, there goes Lot.
He was righteous.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's a powerful passage in terms of the freedom for him to debate with God and to interact and to ask, and God never gets angry. We see in fact, again, the fact that God stood before Abraham, God set this whole thing up. He tells him because he wants him to ask. And he shows him, you can ask. And then when he gets to the end, he basically says, even when you don't ask for the right thing, I'm still gonna answer your prayer because I know what you're asking. And I don't think even that Abraham was beating around the bush. I think you're right, Sarah. I think he had other reasons for not specifying Lot. So he's not being coy like my son Tyler, who when I'm eating Chinese food will comment on how much he loves Chinese food. I love Chinese. It smells like Chinese in here. Did anybody get Chinese? You know, trying to drop hints. So Tyler, are you asking for Chinese? Maybe. You know, just come out and say it. No, I don't think he's being coy. He's not being subtle. He just, he may not have a whole lot of confidence in Lot. But God answers the prayer and spares Lot. And so it just shows us how remarkable it is that God does this. You have a word study that's due not next week, but the week after. So you can double up and do your word study on the word that you're going to do for your final exam. Not your final exam, final paper, sorry. In fact, I recommend that, because unless you just love word studies and you just think this would be great, which if that's you, then more power to you, I'm not going to argue. But that will then require that you get your passage approved. I've heard from, I think, 1 or 2 people.
I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
I was gonna say, I have questions.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me stop this and we can